Bienvenidos a Rony Analiza. Vamos a escuchar cómo la señorita Carrie Filippetti, la secretaria adjunta a la Secretaría de Estado para los Asuntos de Venezuela y Cuba, se refiere a los avances del gobierno de Donald Trump respecto de la situación de Venezuela. Es importante las declaraciones que realiza porque se refiere al Tiar. Tiar y nada más que Tiar. Vamos a escuchar toda su declaración.
I really am appreciative of everybody's ongoing coverage of the situation in Venezuela. It is, of course, a priority for the Trump administration to focus on a free and fair election within Venezuela. So seeing Venezuela return to a prosperous and free democracy is really the defining principle of our policy and has been since President Trump came into this administration. And I'm particularly excited to be speaking with you today as it's an important moment for the people of Venezuela and, by association, for our policy in Venezuela. There's a question that I thought I would answer today that we get a lot, which is, where are we today? What's changed? I think there's a sense from some in the press and the public that perhaps we're just seeing more of the same that we saw over the last few months. And it's certainly true that over the last few months we have seen more of the same from the Maduro regime. First, we've seen more of the same from the Maduro regime's manipulation of resources to line its own pockets at the expense of the Venezuelan people. While the Venezuelan people have suffered from a lack of access to basic food and medical care, the Maduro regime has used the money it does have not to support them, but to pay back bad loans to bad people. They're paying Russia for military support and equipment instead of buying food for the Venezuelan people. They're sending free oil and gasoline to Cuba, while the Venezuelan people stand in lines for hours, simply with the hope of filling their gas tanks. And of course, they're prioritizing the delivery of surveillance equipment from China over delivery of much-needed humanitarian supplies. And the little assistance that the Maduro regime does claim to provide is used as a tool for social control. I'm sure you've all seen the videos circulating on social media showing Maduro officials compelling desperate families to sign a political pledge, "No More Trump," in exchange for food rations provided by international humanitarian donors. That action, trading food for political support, shows both the depths of Maduro's evil as well as the depths of his desperation. Second, we've seen more of the same from the Maduro regime's continued abuse of human rights. Just 10 days ago, UN High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet presented a follow-up to her June 5th report, in which she detailed the continued abuses of power by the Maduro regime. Despite her calls, for example, for the dismantling of the Maduro regime's Special Action Forces, the FICE, she highlighted at least 57 new cases of extrajudicial killings since the June report came out. That's now added to the list of almost 7,000 killings from January 2018 to May 2019. And in the report, she also highlighted the regime's continued use of forced labor, of trafficking, of exploitation of indigenous communities, and of recruitment of vulnerable populations into illegal armed groups. And some of the worst treatment is reserved for the Venezuelan military. We've seen hundreds of them being detained for failing Cuban-imposed loyalty tests. I think Captain Rafael Acosta is perhaps the most known victim of this abuse, his name now synonymous with regime oppression. And third, we've seen more of the same when it comes to the Maduro regime's manipulation of well-intentioned diplomatic processes for their own gain. Just as they did in talks in 2016 and 2017 to 2018, the Maduro regime used the pretext of a good faith negotiation to undermine the very democratic principles that negotiation was established to support. And if there's any question as to the reason for the suspension of the Oslo process, I would suggest that you not ask me, but that you ask Juan Requesens, who has been detained for over a year, arbitrarily. I would ask that you would speak to Roberto Marrero, who will have been detained for 6 months as of this coming Saturday, also without cause. I would ask that you speak to the family of murdered Navy Captain Rafael Acosta, or any of the families of the almost 7,000 people who have been murdered by the Maduro regime. You can also speak to any of the 500 political prisoners who remain in Venezuelan jails today. Or you can speak to any number of the 26 deputies who have had their immunities illegally revoked by the Maduro regime. Because all of them will point to the same thing, that despite the efforts of the Norwegians and of the democratic opposition in Venezuela, the former Maduro regime never had an intention to engage in good faith, only to use the tools that it always uses: brutality, coercion, and intimidation. Their goal is to exhaust the opposition, but the opposition will not be exhausted. The continued suffering of the Venezuelan people means that the opposition realizes they do not have the luxury of waiting. I started by saying that this is a critical period for the people of Venezuela, and that's because while we have seen more of the same from the Maduro regime, more desperation, more brutality, more manipulation, we've seen powerful new successes for the democratic actors inside Venezuela. Since interim President Juan Guaido assumed constitutional leadership in Venezuela, 55 countries have recognized his leadership and the leadership of the National Assembly. The region has invoked the Rio Treaty for the first time in 18 years, the last of which was on September 11, 2001, which signals its commitment to pursue collective action for a collective response. On September 11th, the Organization of American States passed a resolution condemning the Maduro regime for its manipulation of the Oslo process and attempts to undermine democracy by illegally revoking the immunities of these 26 National Assembly deputies. The United States and allies such as Canada and the European have imposed economic sanctions, including over 200 sanctions for the United States alone, and many countries have underscored the illegitimacy of the Maduro regime through travel restrictions, freezing of assets, and indictments for corruption or narco-trafficking. So the international community has signaled its support for democracy in Venezuela in hundreds of ways and has proven its commitment to maintain that support. And there's something else that we don't talk about as often, which is that despite the Maduro regime's every effort to stop them, the government of interim President Juan Guaido has done everything it can to continue to provide support to the people of Venezuela. They have held regular meetings of the National Assembly, discussing topics of key concern for the future of Venezuela every week. They provided food and medicine to the people of Venezuela and developed concrete plans for stabilization and recovery of the country. They have held thousands of protests and rallies, showing the mass popular support that they continue to hold. And they have continued to keep the Venezuelan people in the hearts and minds of the international community, refusing to cower under the Maduro regime's oppression. So this is a powerful moment. The international community has made it clear, and we have said numerous times, Maduro and his cronies are the reason why this hemisphere is facing the largest forced displacement of persons in its history. That's over 15% of the Venezuelan population has now had to flee Venezuela. Maduro and his cronies are why the Oslo process and all attempts to negotiate prior to that has been suspended. And Maduro and his cronies is what stands between the Venezuelan people and the free and prosperous country they once were, and we know will be again. So the United States will continue to answer interim President Guaido's call to help the people of Venezuela cope with severe food and medicine shortages. We'll continue our efforts to support the people of Venezuela during their humanitarian crisis. And of course, we'll continue to work closely with the region's leaders, particularly of the Lima Group, in multilateral fora to support the Guaido administration's attempts to restore democracy in Venezuela. And with that, I will be happy to take your questions.
Great. If you can all please wait for the microphone and state your name and outlet. We'll start right here on the front.
Thank you very much.
A little, I don't know if the mic's on, but I can hear you.
Is the mic on? And now it's on.
Okay. Beatriz Pascual with EFE. Now it's working. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, some questions have been raised after some photographs appear showing Juan Guaido next to Colombian paramilitaries. What is the U.S. opinion on this? Have you talked with Juan Guaido about this? Has he provided an explanation? What is the situation surrounding this issue? Thank you.
Sure, thank you for that question. So President Guaido has come out in public explaining those images and describing how he was taking photographs with a number of individuals throughout the course of that day and every day. He goes to thousands of protests and rallies and takes pictures with those who ask him to, as many politicians and political leaders do. I think the main thing to focus on here is that if our concern is about association with narco-traffickers and terrorists, then we really need to look at the Maduro regime. We know for a fact that they're providing safe haven to members of the FARC and the ELN, and that in fact there has been discussion about how the video of these terrorists was done inside Venezuela. We have a number of indictments against Maduro regime officials and insiders showing that they are associated with narcotics trafficking. And so the fundamental reality is that the Maduro regime is the entity that is associated with these groups, and certainly not Interim President Guaido or other members of the National Assembly.
Just a follow-up on that. So the U.S. is not worried about possible links between Guaido and these groups?
We are not worried about Juan Guaido being linked to narco-traffickers.
All right, we'll take our next question in the back, please.
Thank you for this opportunity. Many believe that with the exit of Ambassador...
I'm sorry, if you could just state your name and outlet.
I'm sorry. Carla Angola, EVTV Miami. Many believe that with the exit of Ambassador Bolton as a national security advisor to the White House, it would mean that softening of foreign policy towards Venezuela. Instead, President Trump said that Bolton was holding him back. What does that mean exactly? And without Bolton, what would this administration do against Maduro, who remain held back due to the presence of the ambassador? Now that the horses has been released, what comes next, in addition to the sanctions that we have been seeing in the last hours?
The United States has been really strong in our response to the crisis in Venezuela, as many of you know and have been covering. But of course, the president was very clear when he stated that he was going to be doing even more to facilitate a transition. The reality is, every single day that passes where there is not a solution to this crisis, we are seeing the refugee crisis increase. We're now at the second largest refugee crisis in the world is coming from Venezuela. The only crisis that has more refugees is Syria. We are seeing how every single day more people are starving, losing access to medical care in Venezuela. And so the president is sympathetic to that and wants to make sure that we see a transition quickly. We've already seen that since the departure of Ambassador Bolton, there have been a number of new steps that have come forward. The first is the Tiar, the invocation of the Rio Treaty. We're seeing a growing international consensus with which the president intends to work to bring a transition back to democracy in Venezuela. So you'll see actions like that as well, and a continued pursuit, of course, of any additional sanctions and measures like that that we can impose in order to reduce the Maduro regime's access to capital.
Next question will go on the front.
Perfecto. Tal y como lo había dicho, el objetivo de los Estados Unidos es la activación del Tiar. Y lo tienen claro, y lo tienen bastante bien definido. No va a haber otra salida. Y Estados Unidos lo sabe, lo entiende y lo conoce. Tiar, tiar, tiar y nada más que tiar. Está claro. ¿Les parece que está claro o no les parece que está claro? El día lunes es esa reunión. Esperemos, hagamos fuerzas por recibir buenas noticias. Si te pareció interesante este video, no te olvides dejarle me gusta. De igual manera, suscríbete al canal y activa la campanita para poder recibir nuestras notificaciones. Déjanos tu comentario y en ese sentido estaremos pronto con un nuevo video aquí en Rony Analiza.